it's not a matter of just like, oh, this person's charging this much and this person's charging this much, I'm just going to charge what they charge. Well, maybe that works for some people, but also maybe it doesn't. Maybe your services are slightly different. Maybe you offer a little bit more, or maybe you have more expertise or these things. So I don't think it's as easy as this is the industry standard, which I think that industry standards are a good starting point. I don't think that they're an end all be all.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us on another episode of Behind the Scenes. I'm excited to have my guest, Annie Hillman. She is the founder and head bookkeeper at 1428 Financial, and she helps business owners embrace numbers, increase profits, and stress way less with monthly money management. Annie, I'm so excited to have you on the show today.
I'm so excited to be here.
Thank you for joining us. And Annie's going to share with us about the tips and tricks of setting up your business to work for you and not the other way around. But we're going to get into the nitty gritty of financial systems. If you tuned into the show before, we've talked a little bit about finances and the importance of finances, but how the heck do you set up your business to do that? So before we dive into that topic, Annie, I'd love to hear kind of what got you started and how did you found your business?
Yeah. So, it's been 3.5 years ago now. I was working at a winery and I was a staff accountant there, and I loved my job. It was really interesting. I always say there's nothing like working in the wine industry, but I really wanted more freedom. I was at my desk 10 hours a day, and my husband and I knew one day that we wanted to have kids, and I just wanted more freedom to be able to be with them more and not, see them once a day. And also just to be able to, not sit at a desk and do what I wanted to do with my time. So a friend of my husband's approached me about doing his bookkeeping on the side. And I was like, oh yeah, I could do that. That's fine. And then, about a month into it, I was like, wait a minute, I could do this. Like, I could seek out more clients. I could do this for myself. Why not? And so I started looking for more clients, and it happened so quickly. I ended up quitting my job, I think 6 months after that first client, and just kind of hit the ground running. And it's been so fun and so interesting. While I loved my job at the winery, I just love now that I get to work with small businesses in different industries and really just get more into it. Like I said, I loved my job before and it was great, but the fact that I now get to help people who have the same goals as me, who are working for themselves because they also want more time freedom or they want to spend more time with their family, and I get to help them manage their finances so that they can do that. That is so cool to me.
I love that because it's true. Like that's what I've seen so many women, especially like that's been a push, or I don't want to see it go away, but like a big push of moms to want to stay at home and have a little bit more freedom because corporate life just doesn't work. And I know that the finances can be the biggest like point of I don't think I can do it. So kind of what did you look at before you quit? And like if for our audience, they know that like when I quit, I didn't run like specific numbers. I kind of just jumped.
Yeah.
So what should people look at before they just jump into it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it kind of depends on your personality, right? If you're the kind of person who's like, well, I'm going to have to sink or swim, and you do well with that kind of pressure, then if you just want to jump into it, then props to you. I'm not that type of person. It's not my personality. I told myself I want to get to X amount of clients before I quit my job. And for me, I not only looked at the revenue part of it. Okay. Obviously we have bills to pay. I was very fortunate that my husband had a job at the time that paid well. So I didn't have to fully replace my income. Because at first I was like, I'm going to fully replace my income before quitting my job. And I was like, this is so unrealistic. That's not going to happen. Because the other piece of it is not just the revenue, it's your time. Okay. Yes, I could have worked myself to the bone and like got to the point where my business was replacing my salary, but I would have literally no time at all. And I just don't think that is, for me, wasn't the right choice. That being said, obviously everyone has to look at their own situation. If you're at the point where you have to match your salary, then that's the point that you're at. And you just kind of have to look at your situation and say, okay, let's say that I had to take a hit for a little bit. And I knew this going in, that I would be taking a hit for a little bit before matching and then exceeding my salary. How much could I, like, basically, what's the bare bones that I could, survive on? And once you get to that point, then you can think, okay, now I'm ready. I also think that there's probably, depending on what you do, every business is different. If you're a retainer base, then you have clients that every month they pay you a certain amount of dollars. That makes it a lot easier to, get to that point and then quit, because it's like, okay, I know, yes, maybe one client leaves or something like that, but I have this many clients that are probably going to be paying me this much. If you're someone who, maybe you're a course creator and you have launches throughout the year, then it's a little bit more challenging. And this is something that I was just working through with a client on, because she doesn't have that steady income every month. And she was asking, like, I really want to quit my job, but I'm not exactly sure if I'm at the point yet. And when it gets to that kind of situation, what we do is we sit down and we say, okay, this is what we project that you're going to bring in the next 6 months, year. First, before you quit your job, let's talk about having a reserve, which I think is something that's really important and is totally overlooked because, it's for everyone, right? I'm going down a bit of a rabbit hole here, but
That's okay. I love it.
having a reserve in your business is so important, because you never know what's going to happen. But especially if you're at the point where you're like, I'm going to quit my job, it's happening. I recommend having a little bit of a cushion in a savings account. So just in case those launches don't go exactly as you plan, you have a little bit of a backup.
I think that's so important for one, quitting, and two, like, if you're gonna launch a new product, because I've made that mistake also multiple times where I'm like, I need more time, so I'm gonna let clients go before when I think one offer is ready. Like when I tried to switch from retainers to VIP days, and I was like, I'm just gonna go all in, and I wish I would have done a reserve too, like to give myself the leeway to like launch those. So not just for quitting your job, you might want to think about reserves in this sense for if you launch a new offer too. Like, I think that's really good advice, because I did not have a reserve in mind, but it was also like COVID related. So that was like a whole other thing. But I think that that's one thing that so many women like get worried about, is like, how do I, especially service providers, because we have a lot of people who follow the channel that are service providers, or sometimes they also, this is like two separate questions. I'm going on a tangent, but this is what came up when you were saying that. They might have single income. So they might be the only people in their house. So what are some tips that we could give to them to set up their finances or price services? Because I think that goes into kind of what you alluded to, the retainers versus they're a little bit more steady, like how to price those services and be able to predict that a little bit better.
Yeah, this is something that I go through in depth with my CFO clients, is like pricing services, because it's so hard. It's not a matter of just like, oh, this person's charging this much and this person's charging this much, I'm just going to charge what they charge. Well, maybe that works for some people, but also maybe it doesn't. Maybe your services are slightly different. Maybe you offer a little bit more, or maybe you have more expertise or these things. So I don't think it's as easy as this is the industry standard, which I think that industry standards are a good starting point. I don't think that they're an end all be all. So what I like to do is, when thinking about like pricing services, and really I do this with goal setting too, is working backwards. So let's say your goal is to bring home $10,000 a month. That's what your goal, you've determined this is what I need, especially like you said, for someone who they are the sole provider, the sole income in their household. It's important to narrow down, like, this is what I need to have. So you set that goal and then you work backwards and say, okay, I just actually was doing this for myself, for my business, when planning out 2024. So you set this goal and then you say, okay, then you factor in taxes, then you factor in all of your expenses. We talk a lot about with our clients profit percentages. So let's say if you bring your revenue is $10,000 and your profit percentage is 60%, that means you're keeping 60% of that $10,000 as profit. So that's $6,000. So we use profit percentages to factor in all of the expenses. Then we take that and we have what we are left with. Let's use round numbers and say that, it is $6,000 that you, excuse me, It would be the other way. You would need, let's say you need to bring in to factor in taxes and expenses and all these things. You need to bring in, let's say $15,000. And then you do, that would be, like I said, because it's going to be more than what you want to take home because you have expenses, taxes, those kind of things. So once you get to that, you say, okay, I need to bring in $15,000 in revenue. How am I going to do that? Maybe it's I book 5 VIP days, or maybe if you are retainer based, it's I need to get 3 more monthly clients. How am I going to do that? And so like for someone who was retainer based, you say, okay, $15,000. If my services are $500 a month, I need to have 30 clients to reach my goals. So I find that working backwards like that is incredibly helpful because you're not just setting these arbitrary goals. And I think I have a little bit of a qualm with the online world and this whole like with this, it's just like, oh, 10K months, 20K months. And it's just like, okay, well, why? Why are we shooting for that? Why are we talking about these things? Like, does that even fit in with the goals you have for your life? Because for me, what's important to me and all my clients is like, you're setting goals that work for your business. And I think this kind of gets into the whole setting up your business to work for you instead of you working for your business or your life, because if you have these random revenue goals, okay, that's great, but maybe you don't even need that much. Maybe you could be shooting lower and get to spend more time with your family or spend less time working or do whatever you want to do. Or the opposite, maybe you're like, oh, I want a 10K month. Well, maybe you live in New York City and expenses are really high and you actually need to bring in more than that. So I think the whole 10K month and 20K month and all these like arbitrary goals have just gotten so overblown. We're more about just setting goals that are based on your life and what you need.
Right. I totally 100% agree. And I've shared the same sentiment so many times is you want to take your goals and base them on what you actually want, because what people don't realize is for those 10, 20K months, your expenses are most likely going to be going up because you're going to need to hire support, especially if you're like, I want 20K months, but I only want to work 20 hours a week. Well, those don't always calculate out, especially for service providers. And I would say that I'm just of the standpoint that service providers, like there's some coaches out there or gurus or whatever you want to call them, that'll be like, price how you feel. And I'm like, that doesn't work for service providers. It's not like we can charge X amount because they're like, we have competitors and there is like a industry standard. Like you say, we can't just be like, I'm going to charge this amount. And because you're going to be setting yourself up for failure because no one's going to say yes, because they might love you as a person, think you're great, think your services, but they could get the same thing with someone else. I know that's so harsh to say, but it's true.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. I know. Yeah. Okay. I could say if my goal was 10K in revenue, I could say, oh, I'm going to charge 10K for my services. And all I need is one client. No one in their right mind is going to pay me $10,000 to do bookkeeping for them. It's just not going to happen. So it's like, yes, I get the whole, like, it sounds good. Oh, charge what you feel, but it's just in reality, it doesn't play out well.
Oh, I know. I always see those like easy 10K months. You can sell this product at 100 or this and this. And I'm like, yeah, you're not even talking about everything that goes into getting any of those. And then the piece of pricing out like a 10K offer. And then that's like a whole different clientele. Like that's a whole different sales conversation that some people just aren't ready for.
Yeah. And everybody always talks about like, oh, 10K months. And I always want to be like, okay, is that 10K in revenue or is that 10K in profit? Because those are two very different things. Like if you bring in 10K in revenue, but your expenses are $9,000 and you're only left with $1,000 in profit, like, I don't really know that that's where we want to be at.
Right. Exactly. There's so many factors that go into it, but kind of like going back to setting up the business to work for you versus you working for your business. I know that there's a lot of good tips on how to set up financial systems and financial pieces, since that's what the channel is all about. It's like behind the scenes, like how can we make it easier and less overwhelming to do the bookkeeping, to look at our finances?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, and we kind of talked about how setting up how, to goal plan so you know what you're headed for. But as far as like back end systems and that kind of thing, I love talking about this. This is so fun. This is such a good conversation. I think there's something to be said for a spreadsheet. Like you can track your expenses on a spreadsheet, on all your income on a spreadsheet. And if you do a good job, you can give it to your tax preparer at the end of the year, and they're going to do a perfectly fine job filing your taxes for you. That being said, there's a better way. And it's funny for me to say this because I sell a spreadsheet, and I think that it's really good for business owners starting out. If you're like, I don't want to pay the monthly subscription fee for a accounting software, it's a great way. It's a great place to start. That being said, if you're like, I want to set up my business well from the beginning, not have to worry about later switching from a spreadsheet to an accounting software, I just want to get it done and hit the ground running. There's a couple of things that we recommend. Number one, get a business bank account, non-negotiable. Do not use your personal bank account. And eventually, you know, when you work up to it, there's 4 different bank accounts that we recommend having for your business. I don't recommend starting there though. I recommend starting with a checking and a savings account. Keep it super simple. Get a separate checking account, separate savings account. Do not use your personal account. I know I already said that, but it's worth saying again.
Do it though, and it blows my mind. I had a client who I was her OBM, and she's like, I've been operating for 5 years and I don't have a business bank account. And I'm like, this is maddening. This is so maddening.
Not only is it like not good practice as far as like your bookkeeping and making sure that things are separate, because the IRS wants things separate. It's just best to keep the door closed between business and personal. Not only that, it's so much easier if you go into your business bank account and you're like, I know that everything in this bank account is for my business. And I don't have to go through my personal statements, be like, oh, shoot, I spent $54 at Target last month. Was that for office supplies, or did I buy like a new outfit? You don't even have to think about that. So number one, get a separate bank account. The second thing is an accounting software. So everybody knows QuickBooks. I am not crazy about QuickBooks. I think that there's some issues. I think their customer service, really their
customer service does suck.
It's terrible. It is so bad. I could go on and on about that, but I won't. There is an alternative.
I'm surprised. I like want to hear more about this because I've never heard an accountant say like, I don't like QuickBooks. Like everyone I've talked to always says QuickBooks.
I am not a fan. And here's the thing, like I said, the software, sure, it's fine. It does well enough. It's really like, if you get it set up, it's not that big of a difference, other than I do think the alternative has better like integration options with Stripe and that kind of thing. But QuickBooks customer service is so bad. I've called into them, and I kid you not, at one point I called into them and their answer to my question was, I don't know. And that was it. It wasn't like, I don't know, let me ask my supervisor, or I don't know, let me look into it. It was literally just, I don't know. I was like, you're the customer service line. Like, wait, like, is there someone else? So that's my little tangent about QuickBooks. I don't love it. The alternative that I adore is Xero, and it's spelled Xero. Their plans start at $12 a month, so it's cheaper than QuickBooks, and their integrations work really well. Like a lot of us online service providers use Stripe. Xero and Stripe integrate really well together, and their customer service is literally unmatched. And for me, like customer service
also integrate well with Zapier.
Yes, they do. Exactly. And Dubsado, if you use Dubsado, they integrate well with a lot of the systems that we as online service providers use. And the cool thing too, I like about about Xero, is that they're really, for them, they listen to like us as accountants or bookkeepers. They listen to us when we say, hey, like I want an integration for this. And I kid you not, there was one that I was like, I would really like an integration for this. And I know I wasn't the only one saying it, because literally 6 months later, it was like, oh, there's an integration for that now. This is fantastic. So to have, as someone who prides themselves on their business being really good with customer service, it's really nice to work with other businesses that feel the same way.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm gonna have to, like, I'm been a QuickBooks user because all my accountants and like whatnot have used it. And I even have my business checking account through QuickBooks now because I couldn't find a thing or an account that would work well. Like I just did not like it. So I ended up switching to their checking account, but mostly because they have what they call our digital envelopes. And
Oh,
then I put money in these digital envelopes and I can earn the interest on the money just sitting there. So I kind of like that. But I do have problems with like, I don't like their invoicing features, which I don't use. I use Dubsado. So it's like, they just, for being a bookkeeping slash accounting software, you think there'd be a little bit more flexibility built in. Like you can't do multiple payment plan, like you don't have the payment plan flexibility like Dubsado and all those things. So I totally agree. And now I'm like, oh, I wonder. I always like checking out like if someone says like this is better, I want to be like, oh, why? Like, does it work? Could it work better? Like,
Oh,
you
I do
know?
too. I will say this though, if you're on QuickBooks and you have a bookkeeper or an accountant and they're managing it for you and they love QuickBooks, hey, let them do, what they're gonna do because you obviously want whatever system they prefer. I
Right.
just happen to love Zero and
But it's
yeah.
super intimidating if you're gonna do it by yourself.
Oh yeah,
Like,
for sure. Yeah, that's the other thing with Zero is like, QuickBooks will say like debits and credits and things like that. Zero uses their
mhm.
like terminology that is so much more easy to understand. They'll say like money spent and money received or things like that. So it just makes it a lot more straightforward for someone who is managing it on their own.
That's awesome. And because it's like you said, such a better price point. And like I'm such a proponent of you should have something like a software is way better than like, yes, spreadsheets work. I still use spreadsheets for like tracking or manipulating, analyzing the data, the types like things like that. But I just am like, you would be better off just investing in even like a low cost software because it's going to make your life easier. Like you said, the automations will be there to help you free because that's the biggest thing with solopreneurs and online service providers. Like they don't take advantage of enough of the integrations, like you mentioned, with all those pieces to free up their admin time.
Yeah, it's so true.
But I totally got us off track. But so for Zero and or if they're like, well, I already use QuickBooks, what are some of the things that they should be building in to their routine as well, like to keep up with good finances? Because I know that it can
Yeah.
be really easy to neglect those.
I always recommend if you're going to be managing your books on your own, set a monthly money meeting. Within the first couple of
Mm.
days of the month, let's say, like it doesn't have to be on the first, but let's say somewhere between the first and the third. Because if you're doing your bookkeeping on like the 25th of the month for the previous month, that's not going to be super helpful in helping you make decisions in your business. So sometime, let's say in the first 5 days of the month, set a meeting. You can do a recurring meeting on your calendar so that every month it pops up, you set aside, let's say 2 hours to do your bookkeeping. And you go in, you open up QuickBooks, Zero, your spreadsheet, whatever it is, and you do your bookkeeping. And I find that having it on your calendar instead of just saying, oh yeah, I'll get to it, or, I'll do it
Yep.
eventually, is having that time in your calendar, or maybe even put it in, a lot of us use ClickUp, put it as a recurring to do in ClickUp to do your bookkeeping that within those first couple of days of the month. That is going to be the biggest thing because there's tips and tricks and there's a lot of things that I could talk about when I talk about someone who's going to manage their own books. But the biggest one is, and some people don't want to hear this, but the only question you need to ask yourself is, are you going to do it? And that's really what it comes
Yeah.
down to, because we can
Yeah.
say, and we all do it with different things in our business. I told myself I was going to set up ClickUp for myself for a year. And did I do it? No, I didn't. And a lot of people are like that with their bookkeeping. They say, I'm going to do it myself. I am. And then they get to December and they're like, wow, I haven't done it since March. So really that's the biggest question you want to ask yourself. Am I going to do this? And it's not fun, but you have to be honest with yourself. And that's really what it comes down to.
Yep. I always say if it keeps falling off your to-do list, then you need to delegate it to somebody else. Cause like a lot of my clients will be like, I could set up my ClickUp, but then they end up just hiring me to do it because they're like, I just don't have the time or that's not what find some enjoyment. And literally the way you described it, that's when I was like, I know I need a bookkeeper because I would
Yeah.
set aside time Friday and it would come and I would do other finance things, but I wouldn't do like the necessary pieces of like going through the expenses because like I love data, but I wanted someone else to get the data ready for me. Like I love running scenarios, I love running those kind of things that I was like, I hate going through and categorizing and all of that monotonous stuff. So
Oh,
yeah, if you're not going to do it, just hire someone else to do it. And I always recommend like you should outsource your bookkeeping. That's like one of the first things when clients talk to me, like you should outsource that if you haven't already. Like
yeah, I completely agree.
it's just so much easier to get someone else to do that piece.
It really is. And I always look at it as like, okay, so you could spend, let's say you spend 2, 3 hours a month working on your bookkeeping. You could do that. Or what else could you do at that time? You could spend it doing, could, let's say you have like strategy calls and you book, instead of doing your own bookkeeping, you book, 3 strategy calls at $250 each. That's $750 right now. That more than pays for your bookkeeping. And you don't have to do it, and it's done correctly. Or maybe it's not even spending it doing money. Maybe you just want to take your kids to the park, and that's what you want to do with those 2 or 3 hours instead. I always look at it as like, yes, it's money going out, right? You have to pay your bookkeeper on a monthly basis, but what do you get back? You get back time. And really, like, I think that that's what we're all trying to do, is get back more time in our businesses.
And it's done correct. I think that's the biggest thing because there's a lot of, like we talked about earlier, women who are starting businesses and doing all of this, like to spend more time with their kids. But a lot of them, not a lot, but there are a good majority of women who they don't come from like a corporate or a finance or a business background. So it's always like, that's one thing, finances and legal stuff. You don't want to take the chance of
Oh, exactly.
not getting it done right because there are there are serious consequences if you don't pay your estimates, if you don't do this, if you don't do that. So it's like I'd rather pay $200 to $300 a month to know that it's going to be done right and nothing's going to come back and bite me in the butt.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. You're not just paying, like you said, there, you're not just paying for getting your time back. You're also paying to know that it's done correctly. And that's even bigger.
Right, because you could be going back and scrambling at tax time or like things didn't get done. So I definitely think that is a huge piece of mind and takeaway. Like there's some things that are really invaluable when outsourcing that. Is is there any last takeaway that you would like our audience to walk away with or lesson learned that you'd like to share to the audience?
Yeah, that's such a good one. I think that we didn't really touch on this, but my biggest thing when talking about finances is that I just want people to know that it does not have to be stressful. There is so much stress that surrounds finances and all of these things. And honestly, sometimes it's a fear of finances or fear of knowing exactly what's going on. But I just want to remind you, there is a better way. It does not have to be that way. Whether you're doing it yourself or whether you have a bookkeeper that's there to guide you and support you and help you, there is a better way to manage your finances so that's not stressful, so that you are getting that information. And the thing about that too is that, yeah, you could ignore it. And when you ignore it, it just makes it more stressful and more fearful. Whereas when you are on top of it, you have someone supporting you that is really helpful. Not only are you understanding your info, but it removes the emotion from it. You have someone there that's supporting you, that's saying, okay, you as a business owner, and I do it too, we all do it. We're all going to read emotion into our numbers. We're going to say, ooh, that was, that month was not as profitable as I wanted to be. And we tell ourselves these stories about why it was. If you have a trusted bookkeeper that you work with, they're going to be they're going to be objective about it, whereas you're going to be subjective about it. They're not going to have those stories. They're not going to have that emotion to read into it. And they're going to be there to support you and to help you and say, you know what? Yeah, you're right. Maybe that wasn't as profitable as you wanted to be this month. What are we going to do next month to change it? And remind you, you don't need to beat yourself up about it. That is something that happened. Let's figure out how we can change that going forward.
Yeah, I think that's such good advice. And I'm glad you brought up the objective and subjective piece because we can tell ourselves these stories or get way too emotional or like then the mindset piece comes in and rejection or whatever stories we have because it could be good or bad. So I think that's such a good point. And for anyone watching, Annie has shared her guide with us. So that's going to be in the show notes tag below. So if you want to learn more about the guide and see what steps you could be taking to make things in your, or not things, but your finances less stressful, she has that link below. And your socials will also be linked below. But where do you hang out the most so that people can go and find you?
Yeah, I would say mostly on Instagram. You can find me on there 1428 financial, and it's like the numbers for 1428. That's where you find me the most. I'm dabbling a little bit on Pinterest, but definitely Instagram is where you can find me the most.
Yeah, I do have a question, one more question, because I know I was gonna be last, but like, well, how'd you come up with your name? I just think it's interesting, so I wanted to ask.
Yeah, that's a good one. So this is a little bit longer of a story than you probably are asking for, but
That's okay.
I was Atlas Financial for the first 3 years of my business. And then I went to Trade Market and my trademark got denied. Unfortunately, there was someone that already had too similar of a trademark. So it was kind of back to the drawing board. This was a couple months ago. And I was like, okay, this is the time to like really dig deep and decide and pick a name that no one else has so that I don't ever have to change it again. So it's actually based on a Bible verse.
Oh, I love that. Okay. I was like, I figured there was some type of significance behind the numbers. So that's
Yeah,
awesome.
it's Luke 14:28, and it's Jesus telling a parable about, he's saying, I'm not going to get it exactly correct, but he says something along the lines of like, suppose you want to build a tower, aren't you going to sit down first and estimate the cost and plan for it, as opposed to just like starting and like flying by the seat of your pants? And I was like, well, I like that. That's good.
Love that. That's so cute. That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that one with us. I just
Yeah. You can,
genuinely.
I have the full story on my blog too.
Oh, perfect. There we go. We can link that in the show notes as well, the blog about your name, your company's name. So thank you so much for sharing with us. Thank you for joining me today. And if you guys are watching, make sure you go and connect with Anne because she has great resources.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. This is really fun.